Specialized roles of police. Learning objectives. List the primary responsibilities investigated. Describe the three basic types of identification used to identify criminal suspects. Explain what DNA profiling is. Describe the role of criminal investigator analyst. Summarize the two areas in which intelligence units work. Identify the roles and responsibilities of school resource officers. List the issues that vice officers generally focus their efforts on. Explain the benefits of a SWAT team and what they seek to accomplish. Understand the various ways in which canines are used and in what categories they will be specifically trained. So, introduction. Suppressible crimes. Those that commonly occur in a location and under circumstances that give police officers a reasonable opportunity to deter or apprehend offenders. So this is a lot of times we think in terms of the beat officers. When they're in the communities, that's where they stay, or in their areas of responsibilities. And so they have beats that they patrol. So these things are expressed that they can commonly catch people who are committing robberies and burglaries and car thefts, assaults, and sex crimes. Reason being is they're already in the area, in the community. I've seen times where you've actually had a crime being committed, a citizen seen it and ran and found the beat officer, police officer, and told them, hey, there's a crime being committed over there. Somebody just broke in that house. And officers respond to the scene and apprehend them. They need covert surveillance and decoys. So a lot of times officers out there, sometimes they may have the beat officers who may be out, but they also have other officers come work with them and do covert surveillance in unmarked vehicles. And sometimes the beat officers will act as a decoy. They would go certain places and sit and patrol. And when the criminals think it's safe to go somewhere else, they don't understand that there's covert surveillance being going on over there. And subsequently, they apprehend them. Specialized advantages. Attention is narrowly focused when you look at these specialized groups. Officers develop expertise. They become subject matter experts in it because that's all they do. And a lot of times you find them that they do it for a very long time. Efficiency is improved because they've done it so long. Anytime you have to try to work with one of these officers and stuff, or have something that falls in the area, they are great sources of information. Officers become very efficient in accomplishing their mission. They're very task focused, and it's because it's one or two things that they concentrate on. They're very good at it. It is fairly simple to measure effectiveness. Bottom line is, if you have somebody that's a robbery unit and they're working on solving robberies, do robberies go down? You can measure that. That's very easy. Now, when you have these specialty units, they are very good at what they do. Now, there are some drawbacks too. One of the things, because they are so specialized in what they do, they have less flexibility. So realistically, there's not a flexibility when you have somebody whose mission is narrow and they're very specialized. A tendency to miss big picture stuff. So if it's the robbery unit and they're working on robberies, well, that's what they concentrate on. What they don't concentrate on is things like, well, the robberies actually, there's other crime associated with that's not robberies that's happening as well. They wouldn't pick up on that. Failure to coordinate with other units. You can have a tendency sometimes of these specialized units to tend to want to operate autonomously and not play fair in the sandbox sometimes. So they don't want to share information or whatever else. So it does happen. And you definitely need supervision with these type of units. If you think back historically in the United States, a lot of times, not a lot of times, but many times we've seen situations where law enforcement officers got in trouble who are out there working the streets. One of the things that I've noticed is a lot of times they're specialized units. And one of the first things you have to check is the supervision. What type of supervision do they have? Investigators. So investigators, when we look at the investigators, may refer to a patrol officer performing investigative duties, a detective or forensic specialist. Do not determine a suspect to be guilty. They remain objective. Preliminary investigation actions performed immediately upon receiving a call, respond to the scene. So a lot of times we refer to this, a lot of times they're saying investigators here. I'm going to use another word, first responder. A lot of times the first responder is a patrol officer. Again, because they're in the area. They're usually out and about somewhere in the vicinity. And so a lot of times they respond to the scene before anybody else. And when they do, is they know what to do. If for instance, if they go to the scene and they encounter that there's been a homicide, robberies, or rape, they know who specialized groups to call to come to them, but they're going to be first. What these people have to do is, all investigators, they have to maintain their objectivity. You have to look at, do not determine that a suspect is guilty. You just have to maintain your objectivity, because if you don't, you will miss things. Going on the assumption that, well, this guy's here and he must be the one that did it, and I'm going to lock him up. You might miss a whole lot of things. He might not be the guy. He might be the guy who just walked by right when you pulled up. So preliminary investigation, actions form immediately. And as soon as they receive the phone call, they respond to the scene. So it is very reactive. General investigative responsibilities. Securing crime scenes. Crime scenes have to be secured. You have to, from the public and from everybody else, because if you don't secure it, crime scenes can be compromised. For instance, if you don't tape off or you don't have officers keeping people back, they may come up, start walking around on evidence that you actually need to investigate the crime. Recording facts. You have to record things. At the time when you're out there, you use recorders. Sometimes there are people, most of the time it's usually video recorders. Photography and video. Well, this is what we're talking about. I'm sorry, let me refer back. Recording facts. That is written. Those are going to be your written facts, the things that you write down, that you're actually experiencing and you see and stuff. Photograph and video. This is where the video comes in. Video in the scene. Because a lot of times you have situations where you may have a case where someone may go to trial and they say, well, I didn't do this, I didn't do this. Well, you got it on video, what they did, what the scene reflects. Identifying evidence. What's evidence and what's not? What do you take? I can tell you, when it comes to identifying evidence, you always err on the side of taking too much. Protecting and storing evidence. Okay, is it properly, it's referred to as a chain of custody. Did someone properly find it, secure it, record it, take it into possession, and store it? Processing evidence. It has to go through that, what I just mentioned, the processing evidence. Interviews. Who are you interviewing? One of the things that is very important is to interview people at the time of the crime or the time that someone witnesses something, because it's been proven time and time again that some people might change their mind. They might give you an example, a witness could get threatened after the fact and then turn around and say, well, no, maybe I didn't see that. But you have a recording. A lot of times with these interviews, if they're crucial interviews, they usually will actually video record those as well. Interrogations. Suspects, referred to sometimes as interviews of the suspects. Interrogation has a negative connotation associated with it. So most law enforcement agencies now don't use that word. They actually refer to it as interviewing suspects. So they refer to those as interviews as well. Identify missing persons. If you have missing persons, you want to get on that immediately. Why? Because it's been statistically proven that if you don't find them in the first 48 hours, there's a high probability it's going to take a long and difficult process, or you may not find them at all. Assisting in identifying suspects. 3 types of identification. Field identification based on the totality of the circumstances, photography identification, and lineup. So when you look at the field identification based on the totality of circumstances, identifying suspects, what race were they, if you could tell? What height, weight? What were they wearing? Photography information is looking at video, pictures of individuals. Lineup identification is when you're going to have the suspects where you actually take the individuals and you put them in a lineup with other suspects and see if a victim or a witness can actually identify them. Sometimes it's done where you actually line them up physically, and sometimes it's done just by lining up their mug shots. If they're somebody who have a criminal history, they have photo mug shots and stuff. So you may take those mug shots and put them in with other mug shots to see if somebody could identify them. Crime scene investigator. Specialist trained to discover, identify, document, collect, and process physical evidence of a crime. Average time needed to complete the certification process is 3 to 6 months. So unlike what you see on TV, many times crime scene investigators are actually civilian. They're not law enforcement. So they're civilians, and that's what they do. And they're very good at it. Again, they're specialized, and they have training, and they have to go to schools to get certifications in crime scene and stuff about how to conduct them. And based upon how they conduct the crime scene can sometimes determine whether or not a guilty person goes free. Criminalistics, branch of forensic science that deals with physical evidence related to a crime. So when you look at this branch and they're processing the information, again, it's working with the crime scene investigators. And this is another area where you find that they are processing things from the crime scene investigators are collecting stuff. These people right here, branch of forensic science that deals with the physical evidence rate. So they're actually dealing with it once it comes in. Fingerprints. So you have IAFIS, which is the world's largest biometric database. More than 47 million people. So this is when you look at international and you say you have fingerprints from international, because once people have committed serious crimes, they go into this database. And so now you can run them through to see if you have fingerprints from a scene to see if it matches somebody in there. Let's say that a crime's been committed and fingerprints were actually recovered from the crime scene. Well, you don't know who it is, but if you take it back and you run it through the database, you may find out that this robbery was actually committed by a guy who's actually been arrested 15 times for robbery and has 4 convictions for it in the past. The biometrics, the statistical study of biological data and the means of positively identifying an individual by measuring a person's unique physical behavior characteristics. So this is when you're looking at the biological data of the individual. We look at things, the physical type, their stature, their structure, all types of things. Now, this is one that you hear a lot on TV, and you hear it in the real world. It's called DNA. So basic building block comprising each person's genetic code. So everybody has a genetic code, and you're unique to no one else, not unless you have an identical twin. Combined offender DNA index. This is where you find individuals where the DNA goes into, like the fingerprint database, it goes into this system for the DNA. Because again, you may recover DNA from a crime scene and you don't know who it is, but when you run it through the system, it may come back. National DNA Index, same thing. Touch DNA needs as few as 36 cells. So when someone touches something and they leave, everything they do, everywhere you go, in reality, everywhere you go, you leave something from you, your body, your person, and you pick up something. One of the problems you run into with DNA is with a lot, and usually those are run by a lot of estate labs or large PD labs, is the backlog. DNA testing is not fast. So you do have backlogs of samples and stuff that many organizations find that hinders the prosecution, whatever else, because realistically, let's say if you got the right guy and you're just waiting for the DNA to come back, but it takes a while, realistically, that's somebody you can't convict in a trial until you get those results back. So you had the DNA Fingerprint Act of 2005. Prior to that, you looked at it, DNA fingerprint stuff was not considered something that was valid. It was like voodoo science, something that was unproven. Now with the being more prevalent, this act coming into play, it is now something that can be used in the court of law. Accelerated DNA profiling technology, MTD. So when we look at the mitochondrial DNA, this is something that comes from like the mother. And so you can actually find out, let's say that you have a DNA sample that's actually, you don't have a very good sample. So you decide to try to test it for just the mitochondrial DNA. Well, what it does, it will show that you got the right guy. How you got the right guy is because the person, the DNA that you recover matches this guy, matches his mother. The mitochondrial DNA comes from the mom. DNA Witness in the Human Genome Project. So we have, the DNA Witness and the Human Genome Project is where we have these different programs that have come into place because of how prevalent DNA has gotten and how we use this stuff in the court of law. And a lot of times what you'll find that these people will actually write the guidelines kind of accordingly to the DNA and the human genome. Profilers produce unknown offender profiles, geographical profiles, investigative and interrogation strategies, expert testimony, systematically collect, organize, and examine all behavior information about a crime or a series of crimes to aid police and agencies. National Center for Analysis of Violent Crime. You see that here at FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. So you have the National Center for this, and you have the FBI Behavioral. People have to be certified in this, and this is not easy. This is a long process. And what they do is they come in and they look at the investigation. They look at all the data, the stats, the type of crime, when they were committed, all this. And then what they do is they give you a profile of the type of person who committed it. Not the person, but the type of person that committed that crime. And I can tell you that profilers that I've encountered stuff are very good. A lot of times they hit very close to home. They can tell you some things that's just mind-boggling. Give you an example. They could probably tell you, there's situations where they could tell you this person is a white male between 30 and 45. This person has a bad relationship with their parents, mother or dad, and this person probably drives a dark blue type of vehicle. Stuff like that. And that is fascinating when you have no facts about about an individual, and then they come through and give you some things that you can say, you know what, this helps us try to apprehend and identify this person. Intelligence officers. So these may be undercover officers investigating crime, or IA officers investigating complaints against, and IA is internal affairs, against officers within the department. Undercover officers, goal is to identify suspects and gather information for prosecution, mainly psychological and physical dangers. So when we look at this, intelligence officers, you think in terms of people who are maybe undercover officers investigating crime or IAs. These people are operating a lot of times in a covert way. And again, it could be investigating, doing covert stuff actually on the public, or it could be actually doing covert stuff on a police department or some officers they believe might be corrupt. Undercover officers, they operate in covert capacity too. And this is not a job for everybody. Because some of these people in some programs will go in undercover and they will stay there for months, weeks and months and long periods of time. And sometimes it does affect their psychological welfare, and because there's a lot of physical dangers associated with too. Internal affairs investigate other officers in the department. Commission on Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies, CLIA. So when you look at internal affairs, they're the ones, they police the police. And you have officers who would investigate juvenile crime. So when you look at juvenile crime, is whether a juvenile is taken into custody depends on the seriousness of the offense. Police investigate reports of neglected or abused children, school resource. So when you look at the juvenile officers, they investigate crimes associated with people who are juveniles, considered who are juvenile. And each state has a definition of what they consider to be juvenile. A lot of times it's under age 18. And if it's a juvenile, if they're under age, let's say that they're 17 and they committed a homicide and they killed 2 people, they may decide to prosecute these individuals as adults. Police investigate reports of child abuse. So when you have reports of that, child neglect and child abuse, they will investigate those. School resource officers are police officers who are assigned to a school. And they work within a school district and within a specific school. They get to know the student. It's kind of like a beat officer. They're not walking a beat in the community. Now they're walking a beat in the school. So they get to know the teachers, the administrators, the janitors, the students. They get to know who the problem students are. And they also know, if there's drugs coming in, who might be doing that type of stuff. So they serve a lot of different purposes. Vice, they vary from community to community. And they would investigate things such as gambling, bookmaking, prostitution, and pornography. So those units are specialized units. And they do their very shit. Most of their stuff they do a lot of times is undercover when they're trying to get into these type of organizations. And a lot of times they'll work with a lot of informants as well. Your SWAT team. Your SWAT team are your high-risk law enforcement officers. They're specially trained to go out there and deal with, let's say, hostage-type situations, terrorist acts, snipers, and high-risk type stuff. If you have somebody, let's say he's a 4-time convicted felon and he's a very violent individual, most likely you would do assessment. And how do SWAT officers normally get called out? The police officers will usually do an assessment to determine the threat level. And if the threat level is considered high, they actually call the SWAT team in to let them do it, because this is their specialty. This is what they specialize in, and they have special equipment, special training, and special weapons to deal with those types of things. Canine units are people who handle the dogs. And you have a couple of different types of canines, dogs. You have accelerant sniffing. This is for like arson, people who are burning things down. They have a specific of that. You have drug dogs. You have who are trained specifically to detect drugs. You have dogs that are actually trained to actually detect bombs and weapons. You have search and seizure, cadaver dogs, crime, and you have accreditation, a National Tactical Police Dog Association that they go through. These dogs are force multipliers because they're actually police officers, and they wear little badges on their collars and stuff. So they help the law enforcement by virtue of being force multipliers to do a lot of different things. They're on call 24/7, these canines, for these different types of specialties, because particularly in large metropolitan areas where you have all different types of things that happen, you have to have that. Reserve and other officers. So when we think of reserve officers, many times reserve officers are sworn law enforcement officers. A lot of times, in many cases, they've retired and now they come back in a reserve capacity, and they only work special events or when they're needed to augment the regular force. Other specialized police, service officers, family liaison officers, the Met police, community service officers, transit police, airport police, campus police. All these are sworn law enforcement officers, and they have arrest authority, and they work in various capacities. So you see there are a lot of different ways to go into law enforcement, a lot of different areas you could specialize in if you were interested in doing so. That concludes this chapter.